1628, the Dutch East India Trading Company ship the Batavia set sail on its maiden voyage. It would never reach its destination. Unbeknownst to the ship's commander, Francisco Palciel, a small group of crew members were plotting a mutiny, led by the psychotic Geronimus Cornelius. Before this mutiny could take place, however, the ship was wrecked in shallow waters near a series of small islands off the western coast of Australia. Panic took hold.
Because of the great wailing that there was from the ship by women, children, sick and anxious people, we decided to put most of the people on land first, and meanwhile to get ready on deck the money and the most precious goods, for which I did my utmost. But God the Lord chastised us with many rods, for in spite of all the zeal we made to cant the vessel to leeward or to fall, it turned out exactly the opposite because of the uneven reef upon which it was set, which so caused it that the people could only come out of the ship very slowly.
Arriving on what is now known as Beacon Island, and seeing that there was no fresh water supply, Palciel set sail on the ship's longboat alongside 48 others to seek help. Being the most senior official left behind, Cornelius took control, his fellow potential mutineers acting as his henchmen. They brutally murdered anyone who dared to go against them, and across the next 2 months, Cornelius and his followers killed over 100 men, women and children. Those who remained faithful to Palciel led a resistance. During their final battle, the commander returned aboard the Sardar.
Coming there, I saw no people, at which we wondered. I sprang ashore, and at the same time we saw a very small yawl with 4 men rowing around the northerly point. One of them, named Uiba Haiges, sprang ashore and ran towards me, calling from afar, "Welcome, but go back aboard immediately, for there's a party of miscreants on the island near the wreck, with 2 sloops, who have the intention to seize the yacht."
Palciel had Cornelius and his men captured and tortured into confession, upon which their hands were amputated with a hammer and chisel and they were hanged. So goes the legend. Traitors. It's me! Now you might be wondering why I'm telling you this story of high seas treachery in a video about a BBC reality TV show set in the Scottish Highlands and fronted by Claudia Winkleman. But the truth is, this story of bloodshed and betrayal is baked into the DNA of the Traitors. As creator Mark Poss explained,
"The starting point was a book I read in 2014, which was about an old 17th century vessel in the Netherlands which crashed into an island and led to a mutiny. It was a real story and those people killed each other. Nobody knew at the time when they came to the island who was in favour of the mutiny and who wasn't. The core of the story is that people didn't trust each other, and what it said was that people can't live in a dishonest world. I started thinking about how to create a world where people can't trust each other and put them in a bubble."
And this aspect of the Traitors, the lack of trust, the growing paranoia between the contestants, is the first thing that drew me to it. There's a sense of suspense, tension and intrigue here that sets it apart from its contemporaries. This isn't reality TV as we know it. This is Big Brother as Shakespearean tragedy. It's Love Island for fans of Agatha Christie. It's the Great British Bake Off if every episode ended with them serving food at the Red Wedding. It's basically the only reason left to continue paying your license fee, and I am completely hooked. It's camp drama of the highest kind. It's total trash, and I absolutely love it. But why? And what does that say about me? And what does its massive, massive success say about the rest of us as well?
This is the ultimate game of deception, skill, and trust. This is The Traitors.
The Traitors was first broadcast in the UK on BBC One in November of 2022, and it was an almost immediate hit with audiences and critics alike. The first episode alone drew an audience of over 3 million, with that number rising to just under 5 million come the finale, and it was heralded by critics as an addictive and energetic addition to the reality TV canon.
"I'm not a traitor, I swear on everything!"
Writing of the show for The Guardian, critic Lucy Mangan wrote,
"The Traitors is the Highlands Hunger Games. It is terrible, a pandering to our basest, most voyeuristic, atavistic instincts, an exercise in exquisite cruelty lasting 12 weeks. You're going to love it."
Can't murder me, I come back.
No, I won't. I would never do that to you. Or would I?
It won a BAFTA TV award for Best Reality Series, and Winkleman bagged herself one for Best Entertainment Performance.
OK, just to be clear, we're going to Scotland. We've got some cloaks. We're going to use the word murder. I've got a big roll neck and I'm holding a ceremonial pouch. Are you OK with that? And they went, go for it.
And if you've watched it, and I'm assuming that you have, because if not, then well, why are you here? Seriously, off you go watch it right now. Leave. Then you no doubt understand just why this is the case. The show is absolutely captivating. A ruthless display of distrust, backstabbing and manipulation and mind games. And that's not even an exaggeration.
Let's go for it, let's really twist things up.
It hits all the standard reality TV staples. Over-the-top revelations, a hilariously dramatic score, the general humour and entertainment of simply just seeing a bunch of strangers shoved together in an extreme or unusual circumstance. But it's all filtered through this lens of treachery and paranoia, transforming it into a kind of beautifully camp mind game of the highest order.
I'm just saying some evidence.
Maddie, just stop talking. I can't be asked with you anymore, honestly. It's doing my head in.
In her book True Story, Professor Danielle J. Lineman writes,
in some ways, the genre is hyper-focused on the individual, showcasing humans with interesting traits or quirks, drag queens, celebrities, people who eat their own couches, and underscoring the importance of personal responsibility. Yet reality programmes also expose how these personalities are cultivated within the patches of social life they happen to inhabit. When diverse individuals, socialised in different ways, come into contact, sparks may fly, illuminating the fact that our understandings of the world are learned rather than innate.
The Traitors pushes this idea to the extreme. Because all these people have is their assumptions, then the preconceptions they have of those around them are the only thing that they can draw from. This inevitably leads to sparks that are often drawn from a multitude of different places, not merely a desire to win the game. The format is suitably, deceptively simple, and it's designed to pit people against each other on a psychological level.
Ooh, big bombshell.
You know this game. It's Werewolves Within, it's Among Us, it's Mafia. Generally considered to be the brainchild of Moscow State University student Dmitry Davidov, Mafia was created, according to Davidov himself, in 1987 and features all the core ingredients of basically every iteration since. But if you've ever played Mafia or any of the iterations of it before, then you know that things can get heated quite quickly. The Traitors was commissioned by the Beeb in 2021, following the success of the original Dutch version. Unlike in the original, however, in which the contestants were celebrities, the UK take switched that up and went with a bunch of regular Joes. And this brings in another element. Because these people are all total strangers, it allows for a much larger sense of uncertainty. It's impossible to know who is telling the truth at any given moment, and not just about whether or not they're a faithful or a traitor.
Like, I don't know, I don't have that gut feeling, and I feel like with me and him, obviously, same backgrounds, like same.
Populating the cast with celebrities means that everyone comes with a certain level of prior knowledge about everyone else. And while that doesn't necessarily impact on the specifics of the game, it definitely robs it of a lot of its intrigue. As such, the decision to move away from the celebrity players means that the UK version has a much larger emotional element. As executive producers Mike Cotton and Sarah Fay put it,
I think it was probably the US version was a lot more cutthroat. They were all very strategic in the way that they played the game, whereas the BBC version, I guess, had a bit more, it was much more emotional.
A lot more heart to it, I think. And I think that a lot of that is testament to the fact that we had a pure civilian cast, and actually the BBC version was the first territory that's done it with a civilian cast. Previously to that, it's all been celebrity cast, so.
And examples of this phenomena in play can be seen in both Series 1 and Series 2 of the UK version. In the first series, magician Tom and presenter and actress Alex entered the castle as a couple, but they kept their relationship secret. This led to several fascinating plotlines, including fellow contestant Matt essentially falling for Alex, and of course, the now infamous Red Breakfast, in which Tom, after learning that the Traitors have placed Alex, along with two other contestants, on trial, outed their relationship to the group in spectacularly dramatic fashion, ultimately setting the stage for both his and Alex's downfall.
This is a lot. Yep. Obviously we've got three people on the line here, and I'll go be honest, love you all. Alex isn't a traitor, straight up. She's my girlfriend.
Similarly, in Series 2, we've seen the mother and son duo of Diane and Ross hide their familial ties from everyone, which led directly to what is perhaps one of the single greatest cliffhangers in television history. Having seen his mum picked off by the traitors in one of the campest and most extravagant deaths in any version of the show, is recruited by the murderous clan, plotting to enact his revenge by destroying them from the inside out. I mean, watch this and tell me that it isn't just absolutely fabulous.
Diane, she's just getting too brave and stuff. Sounds she's getting too brave, so we put her in her place.
Honestly, it's just, it couldn't be more Shakespearean if it tried. And this is a perfect example of how the show expertly builds and teases tension from its premise. According to Poz, the fact that we know up front who the traitors are initially made the show a difficult sell.
Normally, when you create this kind of program, it's a sort of guessing game for the viewers, who have to find out who the mole is. But in the case of the traitors, the viewers know right away who the traitors are. People at TV channels kept telling me that if I know who the traitors are, there's no point. But as it turns out, if you produce a show in a good manner, then it becomes a success everywhere.
He's half right. You see, the Traitors employs the Alfred Hitchcock bomb under the table theory of suspense.
4 people are sitting around a table, talking about baseball, whatever you like. 5 minutes of it, very dull. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information.
In The Traitors, we see this theory at play. As an audience, we know who the traitors are, and so we're on edge, waiting for them to be discovered and called out. It's the main driving force behind the suspense of the series. We're waiting for the bomb to go off, as it were. There's a version of this show in some kind of alt universe that acts more as a mystery to the audience, one in which we don't know the identities of the titular villains. But I think that would lose one of the most integral elements of what makes it so watchable. Because of the knowledge we as the audience have, our allegiances are constantly torn. On the one hand, we want the faithfuls to win, to catch the murderous traitors in their midst. But on the other hand, we kind of want to see the bad guys get away with it.
You're goddamn right.
We're forced to play both sides, to view it objectively from on high, voyeur-like, watching over events as they unfold without the show itself ever telling us one way or the other where our trust should be placed. And that's sort of the camp element of all of this. The Christmas run-up was perhaps the perfect time to introduce the world to this twisting, turning world of faithfuls and traitors. There's something about the show that feels very much in the tradition of the classic murder mysteries we here in the UK are so fond of. And not just because Winkleman struts around the set wearing tweed. The show, of course, plays into this, while the initial concept played out at sea on a pirate-esque themed ship, thus making the original influence all the more obvious. If a contestant was booted out, they had to walk the plank. The sheer scale and cost of such a production meant that a more gothic castle setting was selected instead. And in my opinion, this is one of those happy accidents that just improves the overall quality of the show. As fun and as silly as the swashbuckling version of this sounds, in its current iteration, the murder mystery elements and the gothic parts are just played up so much more. And I think that's crucial to its success as a show as well. It creates an atmosphere that encourages the players to fully embrace their roles. For one, it happily deploys a string of stylistic references to iconic mystery fiction. The players arrive via steam train. The traitors themselves are draped in cloaks and carry lanterns through the darkness. Much of the tasks draw from mystery, horror and thriller fiction. There's burning wicker effigies, grave robbing, masked funerals, and people buried alive.
This is already like an Agatha Christie novel.
And all of this serves to just sort of heighten the expectation that, well, there's a mystery that must be solved here. This enables an audience to sort of ease into the more dramatic elements that the show inevitably draws out later, but also for the players to sort of adopt a more exaggerated version of their roles. It's a lot easier to play detective when you feel like you're in a detective novel, and it's a lot easier to play a villain when you're plotting from a dingy gothic castle turret, dressed like you're off to the orgy from Eyes Wide Shut. As the aforementioned Alex in a post-series interview explained,
"You're fully immersed in it and you can't switch it off. There was no packing it away like with a board game. And even when you're no longer in the castle, you're still ruminating over stuff that happened. What if I had done this differently? Maybe this person is a traitor? You weren't told who the traitors were when you were murdered or banished, so you were left wondering until the show aired. Obviously, you realize it's a game. We're not idiots. But you're fully immersed in it, and they can feel like our emotional brain takes over from logic."
The Traitors then thrives on emotion, and fundamentally I think that's probably the most compelling part. As humans, we're drawn to humanity, both the good and bad, and the Traitors has that in spades. But this is just the beginning. That's just what I like about the show. What does all of this say about me? Released in 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing initially received a somewhat hostile reaction. Writing of the film, critic Roger Ebert said,
"The Thing is a great bath bag movie, alright, but is it any good? I found it disappointing, for two reasons: the superficial characterizations and the implausible behaviour of the scientists on that icy outpost. Characters have never been Carpenter's strong point. He says he likes his movies to create emotions in his audiences, and I guess he'd rather see us jump 6 inches than get involved in the personalities of his characters."
And I suspect then that he'd have trouble believing the characters in the Traitors as well, despite the fact that they're, real people. That was Mike Muncer from the Evolution of Horror podcast, by the way. He agreed to do a voiceover for me, which is wild. He also wanted me to make it clear that that is absolutely and definitely not his opinion. He doesn't agree with Ebert on the thing. The Thing served as a key inspiration for Among Us, the multiplayer game that took the world by storm during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's perhaps not surprising then that it shares several striking elements with the Traitors as well. Most notably among these is the growing paranoia, the isolated team cut off from the outside world, slowly turning in on each other, and of course the suspenseful and unnerving premise of simply never knowing who is on your team and who isn't. And full disclosure time now, Carpenter's The Thing is one of my absolute favourite films of all time, and I have what I consider to be quite a deep personal connection to it. I first saw it far too young and it blew me away. The practical effects were, of course, a big part of this. The nightmarish realisation of the titular creature, an unknowable alien that could take on the appearance of any living being, remains to this day some of the most inventive and grotesque visuals ever committed to film. Plus, they're just really slimy and gross, and that's always a plus. But beyond that, the oppressive claustrophobic mood and atmosphere Carpenter creates, the sense of sheer isolation afforded to it by its Antarctic setting, and the dark, bleak nihilism of the finale simply captivated me. But as an adult looking back on it now, I suspect what I really connected to was, well, the paranoia.
I don't know who to trust.
I know what you mean, Blair. Trust's a tough thing to come by these days.
Never knowing who you can trust, whether or not those around you are friend or foe, is something that I feel like I can very much relate to. Growing up, I had a secret, and it took me so long to actually come out and embrace myself, precisely because I was afraid that those around me simply wouldn't accept it. And I used to think about this a lot, even when I didn't really understand what it was in the first place. Living in that environment, hiding my true self while never knowing who around me could be trusted, is something that I think is reflected perfectly in The Thing. And it's not much of a stretch then to say that those things are all present and correct in The Traitors. The Traitors too shows us a world in which you can't trust anyone, in which no one can trust you, no one is sure of who or what anyone is, and then shows us just how stressful, confusing and horrific living in that world can be.
Just want to suss out one and then I'll go. Like, kill me, let me find me one.
The problem is...
Now, a less charitable version of this reading would place me and people like me in line with the Traitors, hiding ourselves under the mask of Team Faithful, pretending to be something we're not in an effort to fit in, and ultimately screw over our so-called friends for our own selfish needs. And while there is sort of merit to this, there are elements of that I can definitely see reflected in myself, I don't think that's entirely fair, nor does it fully understand just what the queer experience is. And it's worth noting that reading queerness in that way is certainly a thing when it comes to, well, the thing. As Lee Monson writes for Birth Movies Death,
think back to 1982, the year of The Thing's release. The gay rights movement was about a decade strong, so at the very least large metropolitan areas were gaining awareness of gay men and women as a persecuted class, and the cultural notion of coming out had taken shape as the gay community embraced who they were. But the early 1980s also saw the emergence of a hidden, mysterious threat to the gay community, the gay cancer that would later become known as HIV and AIDS. Now, I am not saying that paranoia about AIDS and the apparently infectious nature of the gay community was the primary or even a direct cause of The Thing's post-release popularity, but I do think it speaks to a mindset that would allow such a film to flourish among the straight consumers of the era.
Of course, this isn't a video about The Thing, it's about the Traitors, and while there's something to be said about the heteronormative reading, about the way in which straight cis audiences view queerness in those terms, for me, I think there's more to be said when you consider it from a queer perspective. As Danielle Lineman writes,
unscripted programming has long been on the vanguard of sexual diversity in some ways. Non-heterosexual characters have been a staple of the genre since the beginning. The LGBTQ advocacy group GLAAD have even lauded the genre for its own inclusivity.
And this brings us rather nicely to the camp factor. And the Traitors is just inherently camp. In their review of the UK show's second series, The Standard praised the Traitors for bringing the camp back to prime time. And it's hard to deny that there is a definite camp aspect to the production. The Traitors revels in an excess of the kind not seen since the so-called golden era of reality TV back in the early to mid-2000s. Mad sequences involving gloriously macabre-looking scarecrows, players frantically dodging spotlights while raiding a graveyard, and the titular villains stalking their way through the foggy night while the soundtrack swells to ridiculously overdramatic heights are all just part of the parcel. I mean, it's so absolutely and utterly overproduced that it transcends being cheesy and reverts back in on itself to become tense again.
But hidden amongst them are the traitors who will secretly murder their fellow players at night.
I like the little breath that it has just there. Like, someone watched that and went, oh no, it's not quite enough. Like, we still need just a little bit more. I know, let's add a breath. But while we all sort of recognise these things as being inherently camp, what do we actually mean by that? In her seminal essay, American writer Susan Sontag wrote,
camp is not a natural mode of sensibility, if there be any such. Indeed, the essence of camp is its love of the unnatural, of artifice and exaggeration. To emphasize style is to slight content, or to introduce an attitude which is neutral with respect to the content. It goes without saying that the camp sensibility is disingenuous, depoliticized, or at least apolitical.
In essence then, camp is something that's been exaggerated to the point of parody, but isn't parody. It revels in the excesses of it, but never punches down on that thing because of that. The Traitors undeniably walks this fine line, balancing it perfectly. As the scenarios become more outlandish and over the top, as the simple games of question and answer give way to the spectacle of backstabbing chicanery, while players are strapped to a rickety old Ferris wheel alongside dirtied, weather-beaten skeletons, you can't help but lap up the utterly bonkers arrangement of obviously fabricated threats and genuinely competitive emotional gameplay. And this is where the Traitors exists, in this strange sort of in-between, a contradiction of absurdity and legitimacy, both presented in equal measure. It is, in a word, camp, and camp, as a rule, is queer. As Mo Mayer argues,
queer identity is inseparable and indistinguishable from its processed enactment, or camp. The historical and material evidence demonstrates that this was clearly the case, until Sontag complicated the interpretations by detaching the signifying codes from their queer signified.
And perhaps one of the campiest parts of the Traitors is the performative aspect of it. We've already established how the show works to encourage players to adopt their roles, but it's worth noting at this point that although they refer to each other as faithfuls and traitors, they call the round table process of banishment and the traitors elimination and murder, and so on and so forth. It is, like, just a game. Just a game. I know they all treat it like they're actually dying, but like, we're not at the Hunger Games point of people being murdered for our entertainment just yet. Still, the show works to encourage the players to take on these roles and to take them seriously, and that's key to the campiness of everything. The undercurrent of truth within the exaggeration is integral. Yes, it's just a game, but it's also a lot of money, and thus tensions run high. The stakes may not literally be life and death, but the prize pot would most certainly be life-changing, and so for the players, it kind of feels like that. Thus the embellished and heightened style, potentially dead players laying in coffins, a traitor delivering a so-called kiss of death, the Gothic setting of the luxurious Ardros castle in Scotland, Gothic itself having heavy camp undertones, bring with them an element of honesty in how they're viewed. It's so gloriously false, so unreal and exaggerated, and yet beneath it lays such a brutally honest depiction of real, truthful emotion that it almost can't help but come across as sincere. And this, the sincerity beneath it, is the other key ingredient to what makes the Traitors such a camp classic. Sontag writes,
"One must distinguish between naive, deliberate camp. Pure camp is always naive. The pure examples of camp are unintentional, they are dead serious. It seems unlikely that much of the traditional opera repertoire could be such satisfying camp if the melodramatic absurdities of most opera plots had not been taken seriously by the composer."
And in this, I think, we find the Traitors' secret weapon.
Are we going to do 2 days in a row? I feel like we're missing out on murdering now.
Yeah, I think it's just murder.
This is another reason why the use of non-celebrities is so important to its success. Because there are genuine stakes for the players, because the prize pot is a legitimately life-changing sum of money, the decision to play it as life and death feels less like a cynical attempt to sort of inject some intrigue and suspense into things for the audience, and more just a fun extension of what's already there. There's screaming matches across the round table, desperate pleas by desperate people to be believed, and gloriously silly moments like contestants being forced to carry out a kind of Ocean's 11 style dodge the lasers art heist, or the deliriously stupendous vision of a dead woman leading her own funeral procession while a sinister choir of mourners bounce out clues as to who may or may not have killed her. But these displays of blatant artifice expose the more human element. It's not poking fun at the sincerity, it's amplifying the fun already inherent within it. And that, in my opinion, is the essence of camp. And because the Traitors so perfectly captures that feel, it is, well, queer. I mean, there's a reason why the show has such a massive queer following. And all of that feels very fitting because, as I alluded to at the start of this chapter, the Traitors sort of captures an element of the queer experience. Unlike the reading Lee Monson makes of Carpenter's The Thing, let's posit a different approach. To be queer is to be a faithful. Growing up, I knew there were people out there who, if they ever learned who I truly was, they'd reject me. But I also knew these people weren't strictly in the majority, at least not of the people around me. Nonetheless, the fear and paranoia of who could be who meant that I had to keep myself hidden, even around those I believed that I could trust. And if that sounds like the experience of the faithfuls, desperately running around in a panicked state of paranoia, trying to figure out who's who while suspiciously eyeing everyone, then, well, you're right, it does. And look, you might think it's silly to apply this kind of reading or to overthink and analyse something like the broad reality TV of the Traitors, but to ignore it, to ignore its massive success, not just in the UK, but across the globe, would be a mistake. Understanding how the Traitors reflect societal experiences is key to not just understanding why it struck a chord with so many people, but also to understanding those societal experiences themselves. So, George Orwell's 1984 is one of the most important and influential pieces of dystopian fiction ever made. While it was far from the first to play in the dystopian sandbox, it remains, even to this day, undoubtedly one of the most recognisable and iconic. Dystopian fiction has long served as a way to deliver scathing political commentary, holding a mirror up to society and reflecting the worst of it back at us. But Orwell's nightmarish vision of a Britain transformed into an authoritarian superstate resonates so much in part because it rings so true. There are concepts and ideas that appear in 1984 that are so prescient that they've become key influences on how we think about and discuss our world. Phrases such as newspeak, doublethink, and Room 101 are terms used in everyday vocabulary. And then, of course, there's first broadcast in 1999 on the Dutch television channel Veronica, a series incidentally directed by Traitors creator Mark Poss, Big Brother, the iconic reality television series that purposefully lifts its name directly from Orwell's vision of an oppressive, surveillance-obsessed hellscape, is arguably one of the major touchstones of our modern entertainment landscape. When it comes to reality television in particular, Big Brother is, well, far from the first, the seed from which pretty much everything grows. While in the early days it kept up an appearance of scientific relevance, bringing in psychologists and behavioural experts to comment on the week's events.
Because the girls have been acting like adults and the boys have been acting like naughty little boys.
Ooh, big bombshell.
In my opinion, the true reason for its success can be traced back to one thing. As Ruth Wrigley, one of the UK version's original producers, puts it,
Big Brother had a massive idea at its core. Watch and judge. Who is evicted? You decide. That's taken for granted now. People pass judgment on Twitter, vote on their phones and so on. But back then, programmes didn't do that. You didn't have the ability as a viewer to affect the outcome of a show.
This single element turned the audience from passive viewers into active participants, scrutinising every move the housemates made and then using that as justification to anonymously snatch success from them. Likewise, because the housemates themselves would secretly nominate who they wanted to be put up for eviction, they too engaged in similar practice. In a sense, Big Brother recreated Orwell's nightmare, streamed live 24/7 on the web for all to see. A world in which no one can be trusted and everyone watches everyone else, anonymously eliminating them if they dare do anything that seems just a little bit off.
Everybody's under observation. But it's not so.
And it's worth noting that even under this pressure cooker of paranoid scrutiny and judgment, in 2004, you all were perfectly happy voting for a transgender woman to win, so... yeah, that's not got anything to do with what I want to say, I just wanted to make that point. If this monstrous world of paranoid scrutiny and judgment sounds a little like the world of the Traitors to you, then you probably already know where I'm going with this.
You're double questioning yourself. Is it nerves? Is it guilt?
In the wake of Big Brother's success, a wave of similarly formatted social experiment come competitive game shows washed its way across the television landscape. The era of reality television had finally arrived.
Reality TV is in fact a pop culture touchstone that illuminates our everyday experiences and can help us to make sense of complex social forces. The genre is a funhouse mirror to be sure, but one that powerfully reflects the contours of our social world. It takes the elements that are central to our culture, our collective preferences, our norms and taboos, and the jagged edges of our social inequalities, and beams these out to us in frenetic detail.
And unsurprisingly then, dystopian fiction took note. While deadly games have long been a staple of the genre, films like Roger Corman's Death Race 2000 from 1975 and the Arnie vehicle The Running Man in 1987 envision worlds in which totalitarian overlords use murderous reality TV as propaganda.
I'll be back. Only in a rerun.
In the new millennium, with the rise of real-world reality television, this idea really began to take hold. As Tom Boland writes,
"These stories were responding to 20th century experiences of state authoritarianism, from fascism to Stalinism and beyond. It is understandable given this history that dystopias have largely expressed our anxieties and fears about the state. Yet, around the turn of the millennium, writers of dystopias increasingly turned their attention to critiquing capitalism. These stories presented fictional worlds where protagonists compete in deadly games.
Capitalism rules our lives, and it is the means by which we do absolutely everything. Capital, whether that be literal capital or social capital, is an aspect of pretty much every single thing that we do. The advent of social media has only pushed us further, and as Boland also notes, films like The Hunger Games or shows like Squid Games exaggerate the experience of life under capitalism in an effort to satirise it. We live in a world under constant watch, our every move viewed and judged by an audience of our peers, both through the dog-eat-dog systems that capitalism itself places upon us and through the lens of social media. Which brings us all the way back round to the paranoid uncertainty of the traitors. We've already discussed how the show uses language and visuals to amplify and play up the stakes within the game, but I do think there's more to be said about the way in which this works.
He's either a traitor or he's just a faithful.
The Traitors itself, like many competition-based reality shows, is fundamentally a capitalist endeavour. The prize is money, enough to be considered life-altering, and thus greed and desire become driving factors. And you're gonna have to forgive me here, but I'm gonna quote Marx, okay?
Money is the universal, self-established value of all things. It has therefore robbed the whole world, both the world of men and nature, of its specific value. Money is the estranged essence of man's work and man's existence, and this alien essence dominates him, and he worships it.
And with this in mind, then, I think we can see how the Traitors becomes a reflection of capitalism at play. The backstabbing, treachery, mistrust, paranoia, aggression and desperation are all drawn from a place of desire for the prize pot. Greed becomes the all-consuming factor, and as the Traitors themselves inevitably wind up turning on each other, this reflection becomes even sharper.
He won't throw us under the bus, and it's easy to switch up on him, but will he say yes?
Intentionally or not, the Traitors is a scathing takedown of the way that capitalism inevitably leads to self-destruction. Marx's vision of a world in which capitalism will ultimately lead to its own demise is laid bare by the frantic mind games and politics of the contestants in the world of the Traitors.
Trust me.
Yeah. Trust you.
Of course, there's a part of this that's built into the game from the off. Even without the prize money, the competitive nature of it leads to stress and frustration. Margaret Robinson writes of the game Werewolf,
"It's a game that is almost entirely about careful wording and hidden subtexts. The only advantage the killers have is knowledge. They know each other's identities. With that, they split the world into the empowered minority and the vulnerable majority. Balancing that dynamic is another strength. Mafia's resonance with some of the worst but most universal traits of human society. Every culture has had its witch hunts and pogroms, and anxiety about being caught on the wrong side of persecution is a fear that crosses borders, languages, and eras. Mafia, in its abstract, trivial way, lets us play with those fears."
Werewolf is yet another iteration of the game the Traitors is born from, and so frankly the exact same thing could be said about the show. The Beeb themselves describe it as a competition series built upon strategy and suspicion and a game of trust and treachery. But the prize pot and the scale of it adds another element to this. The way that the contestants turn upon each other, doubt each other and accuse each other without even the most basic evidence is quite a sight to behold.
It does just look convenient though, doesn't it?
Well, if it looks convenient, it looks convenient.
Witch hunts are indeed abound, with the Traitors themselves orchestrating the downfall of both faithfuls and of any of their own who dare to draw too much heat or simply fail to fall in line. In every single version of the series that I've seen, and let me tell you, I watched a lot in prep for this video, the Traitors always turn on each other. As well as being simply captivating TV, it's a fascinating exploration of how power corrupts, greed consumes, and how easy it can be to manipulate people when paranoia, stress, and fear has eaten away at their ability to rationalise and think clearly. The traitors pounce the minute a scapegoat can be found, just as happy to turn on one another as they are on the faithfuls.
Ash was terrible. Ash had to go.
They will stoke the flames of panic and suspicion, encourage and then exploit division, all in the name of furthering their own ends, justifying it by repeatedly reminding themselves, and by extension the audience, that they're merely playing a game. But here's the thing, that game has real world consequences, doesn't it? Like, that's the point. The money they win at the end will impact their lives beyond the game, and thus the game itself on some level ceases to be a game. It's merely just another capitalist system, one dressed up as a campy entertainment show and broadcast for the world to see.
I'm going to say here, I don't think you're a traitor, by the way.
Nick Coldry writes,
Reality television's theatre is secret only in the sense that its playful inversions obscure their links to the labour conditions normalised under neoliberalism. That is how all ritual works, by smuggling past us one set of terms while apparently enacting another.
And there is an element of the Traitors that I think enacts this sort of theatre of cruelty, of psychological torture as entertainment. It's been suggested that participants on the show may need psychological help once the game has ended. And to me this begs the question, if we recognise that about a game show, why don't we recognise it about the system in which we're all stuck living our lives? I mean, the Traitors signed up to be on the Traitors, they knew what they were in for. I don't know about you, but I don't remember signing up to be on neoliberal capitalist cluster. Of course, the show itself knowingly plays into its own more vicious tendencies and ensures the players adopt their roles as fully as possible.
Parting gift.
I mean, consider the team names themselves, Faithful and Traitor. It positions one as honest and one as deceptive from the get-go. And then of course there's the fact that while the Faithfuls bash the Traitors' murder, executive producer Mike Cotton noted of the language,
I think there was a nervousness that we were going to have to strip out, especially for the BBC, that would have to strip out the word murder, or we wouldn't be able to have the dark undertones that we wanted the show to definitely have. And I think what was great was that we were allowed to, we were sort of given carte blanche to do that and have some fun with it.
And it's worth remembering that this is a pointedly violent word. It forces the Traitors into the roles of villains before they've even begun. The Traitors are the baddies by the simple fact that that's their role in the game. But as a powerful minority, they occupy a space closer to the 1% than to the 99%, and their ruthlessness, cunning, and willingness to throw everyone else, their own teammates included, under the bus is telling. To quote Lineman again,
individuals also work actively to shape and present ourselves to others within social contexts. We see ourselves reflected in other people's reactions to us, and that helps us to shape not only how we act, but who we think we are. Across reality programmes, we see individuals interacting with the broader social world, crafting selves in concert with their surroundings.
They adopt these roles and behaviours in part because the game encourages it, but then that begs the question, what's the difference between that and the wider game that we're all stuck playing? Influenced as it is from real-life historical events, there are concepts and ideas, and yes, themes, that are structurally engineered into the Traitors that speak to certain fundamental truths within ourselves. It's a game of social interaction, and as such we recognise certain elements of our everyday lives within it. I think this speaks as to why it's become such a success. In a sense, it's human nature, existing and surviving within an oppressive system splayed out for all of us to see. The game itself, or variations of it, have remained popular across all of history, and this is just the latest version, given a glossy makeover and tight editing to heighten the already present twists and turns. There's something horribly current about watching a group of people scramble around in a paranoid mess trying to screw each other over so that they can win some money. I joked earlier about the Traitors being Shakespearean, and yet this is why Shakespeare is still talked about today. This is why certain stories become beloved and thrive across history. They speak to us on a deeper level. And sure, the Traitors is goofy, silly, campy excess of the highest order, but that doesn't mean that it can't also be those other things too. It might sound like hyperbole, but it's a show that speaks to modern times. The world as it exists today, the post-truth era as it's often been called, was crying out for a story of deception and treachery, and the Traitors has those things in spades. In an interview, Mark Potts said,
I think the concept captures the zeitgeist of our society today. We're living in a world where social media is more and more present. What can we trust? Who can we trust? I think it's a good thing that this show took so long to get made because it's arrived at the right time.
And he's absolutely right. That's why it's been so embraced. We live in a world of surveillance, and also a world of greed. Speaking of which, you can support me on Patreon, don't you know? No, The Traitors isn't some author-led work of art, but that doesn't mean that it isn't worth considering in these terms. Its popularity is precisely because it taps into something that we all recognise. Yes, the camp aesthetics and hyper-editing and general goofy tone mask this, but at its core, The Traitors is kind of a game that we're all playing all the time. Who can you trust? How do you appear to other people? And most importantly, are you a faithful or are you a traitor?